To this day, Starfox and Starfox 64 hold up as pretty kick-ass games, even the former with its primitive graphics and all that for being one of the pioneers of fully 3D gaming, with its cool controls and loads of action, and Starfox 64 for seemingly perfecting the art of 3D on-rails shooters that were started by the first. All in all, fantastic games. As for Starfox Adventures, well, I'm not sure what to say. It's like Zelda, only much more linear and restricting, and you all know how much I hate linearity. I could forgive it in the other Starfox games because, well, it's an on-rails shooter, what you expect? But anyway, I still think Starfox Adventures is a decent game. I like the mood and atmosphere, what with Fox and company being dirt poor, hanging on by a thread and going to the most bizarre out there sort of places and nothing but a beat-up, stripped-down, bare-bones, poorly maintained Arwing to get back on their feet and back in the game. I like the parts that do let you explore. I like the mechanics of the staff. I like collecting all sorts of random crap you find lying around. It's got a lot of problems, no doubt, but I still like it. But we're here to talk about Starfox Assault. A lot of people brush this game off as they would Adventures, and while that's perfectly fine in the case of the tremendously flawed Adventures, I think it's a terrible injustice to Assault. A big chunk of the games I'll be reviewing in the future are just that, games that have been shoved in the gutter because people couldn't see the redeeming qualities of these games, starting with this one. Let's talk about the gameplay. There are the Arwing bits, Landmaster bits, and on-foot bits, the latter two of which a lot of people can't stand, and in the general consensus seems to be regarded as the game's ultimate failure. Some levels are centered around one type of gameplay, but most of them have you alternating between each mode a few times as your current mission plays out. You spend a big chunk of time in the Arwing, flying around shooting up invaders just like in the N64 days. Most people only count stages 1, 5, and 10, but between those, stage 8 and all the sections spread throughout the other levels, you do end up playing at least half the game, if not more, under the canopy of an Arwing. The old bird gets plenty of action. Now, before any of you assume that I'm admitting that the ground sections are bad and you should be able to look past that because there's enough flying sections to make up for it, no. I think the ground missions are pretty cool too. So you can say these parts of the game control badly or uninspired or whatever, but I think it's pretty obvious that what people really can't stand about these parts of the game is that the gameplay is so different. It simply isn't what they expected. They wanted to be in the Arwing the entire time because that ultimately is the best part of the game, and that's fine. It's what they're used to. Their raging nostalgia boners don't lie. In Starfox 64, sure, you had stages devoted to the Landmaster and the Blue Marine, but that only took up like a fifth of the game, with a dozen other stages left for the Arwing, and these other vehicles controlled a lot like the Arwing, so it wasn't hard to adjust to these other gameplay styles in the time they were given. The problem, if you will, is not that these secondary modes in Assault are downright bad, it's just not what people are used to. It's not what they wanted to find, and it's not a return to what they're familiar with, what they fell in love with. As nostalgic as I am for Starfox 64 though, I can still say that I like this gameplay. On foot, Fox controls like the characters you play as in Jet Force Gemini, only faster. Yeah, turning is kind of awkward as are his controls in general, but it's not impossible to get used to pretty quickly, and you can even change the control scheme on the whole if you want. And hey, I love Jet Force Gemini, it's a brilliant game, but that had some pretty awkward controls, and this is more or less a faster paced and more fluid spin on that. It's even easier to aim in this one. So, as far as what you get to play the game as, with some parts that harken back to Starfox 64, and some that harken back to Jet Force Gemini, this game basically feels like a mishmash of two of my favorite games from yesteryear, and not just one of my favorite games, with a wad of fat hanging off of it. It even goes further than that. Being able to charge your blaster to destroy most foes makes it feel kind of like a Mega Man game, and being able to hop into the Landmaster, like whenever, feels kind of like playing a 3D Metal Slug game, only better than the real 3D Metal Slug game. And all of these are games I like, so I'm saying this cluster of gameplay styles is a good thing, at least for me. There's still more to it than that though. The level design of the ground missions is very good, being vast and intricate, but easily navigable. And every stage has a different feel to it, and the maps are wildly different. Stage 3's on-foot section just might be my favorite. I love how complex it is, with so many layers upon layers of different paths to take, so many enemies to fight, which in the end isn't a hindrance since Fox moves so fast that getting around a place like this really isn't hard. Heck, if you want to reach the bottom of stages like this in a jiffy, just walk off a ledge and drop down. Don't worry, Fox will be fine. I think you can even survive being dropped out of an Arwing that explodes in the sky and he'll keep on keeping on like a champ. Falling damage? Pfft, I don't think Fox has ever heard of it. You get to use lots of weapons, including machine guns, sniper rifles, grenades, rocket launchers, and you can even place mines on the ground. If you get a barrier, you can save it for when you're really in trouble, just surrounded by dozens of bad guys who will eat up your health before you can say, "Cocky little freaks!" Use the barrier and blow them all away during this invulnerability period. I really don't find myself using a lot of the weapons. You don't really need most of them, since you can just kill everybody with your blaster if you're careful and keep it charged. Obviously they're there to add variety, but they really aren't that useful. I mostly use the standard blaster, the sniper rifle, and the Gatling gun. As some of you may know, Gatlings are my favorite gun, and games like this make it clear why. Overall, the on-foot gameplay is pretty good. Controlling the Landmaster takes some getting used to though. Like you'd expect based on my description of it being like a metal slug, it controls like a bigger version of Fox. You can ascend to reach higher areas or hover down instead of falling, which lasts several seconds and is a lot like using the Arwing's boost and brake functions, and while on the ground you can hurl yourself forward with a quick burst of a boost that lasts about a second at most on enemies in front of you. It fires very slowly, but these shots are very powerful, and if you just don't miss almost every time, you can clear out most airborne enemies efficiently with this baby. This is pretty rare, but if you ever manage to find a laser upgrade, don't worry about it not working on the Landmaster. Do whatever it takes to reach and grab it. It is so worth it. Suddenly you have a blue laser that travels faster, further, and has a wicked impact radius, and with only one upgrade, not two. Any direction you fire in, all enemies present over there will be atomized. It is so satisfying. Sometimes it's just fun to blow up shit. Now let's talk about the Arwing gameplay. Overall it's fantastic, but I do have a few gripes. For one thing, killing enemies just isn't as satisfying as it is in other gameplay modes. I have tried not to let my feelings for older games affect how I look at this, but back then you got such a great sense of empowerment when destroying enemies. They flashed, they shook around, they made great sound effects. It was fun to watch them crash and burn. When your laser made contact with an enemy, you really felt like you just took a big bite out of them and it felt great. In Assault, the enemies in the Arwing missions sort of just... Ironically, it's actually more satisfying to kill these very same enemies in the other gameplay styles, maybe because of the change in scale. Honestly, sometimes I'll hop into Corneria City and just run around hunting down all sorts of enemies before bothering to seek out my real objective. Another complaint though, the enemy AI isn't very smart. Most of the time, they'll just send swarms of enemies flying at you in a heap. This is okay in Planet Venom and Star Fox 64, because that's the final stage, and if there ever was a time to go all out, it's then. But this entire game is like that. I'm really not sure what to make of this, but I feel like throwing it out there anyway. Also, the Arwing feels like it moves more sluggishly here than in other games, but only a little bit, and I guess I'm just nitpicking now, since it still controls pretty smoothly despite feeling a little slow. My biggest gripe is something that has always bugged players, right from the beginning, but never as badly as it does here. Having to rescue your comrades when they're in trouble. This wasn't so bad in past games, but I swear most levels have each character get in trouble at least once, sometimes twice. It's as if they're taking turns. It's incredibly cumbersome having to keep track of them all, or make it to a certain spot on the map in time to find a good spot to shoot enemies down from. The rewards you get are nice, but really, it almost isn't worth the effort. Overall though, the Arwing gameplay is fantastic, despite these gripes. There's also a couple of on-wing sections that are tons of fun. They're simple, but they break the pace and lovingly scratch whatever itch your trigger finger could possibly have, even after shooting everything else. There are 3 difficulty settings, easy, normal, and hard, indicated by bronze, silver, and gold medals you get upon beating a stage with that selected difficulty while also succeeding to meet a certain quota of enemies you need to kill to earn said medal. Bronze is easy, silver is normal, but man, gold is hardcore. It's not having to find more of this or that throughout a stage that increases a challenge so much as it is the increased damage that enemies do. On this difficulty, enemies eat up so much of your health so quickly, it's ridiculous. Sometimes all it takes is a couple of well-placed enemies all landing blows on you in the span of a few seconds to annihilate you. Some hits take 2/3 of your health, I swear. It's a nightmare sometimes. But as frustrating as it can be, it is also surprisingly addictive this way, and it does add a new layer of depth to the game. Having to explore new areas and fight enemies that you may never bother with on the other difficulties makes it feel more like being in a real war zone where shit is constantly happening, and it adds so much tension and depth. Now let's talk about the other aspects of the game. The music is amazing! These tracks are mostly just orchestral remixes of tunes from Star Fox 64 along with some new original tracks exclusive to this game. I don't like orchestral music in a video game if it's somehow inappropriate for the game and clashes with its environment and atmosphere, or if it's just done with little passion put into it to craft this contrived illusion that it somehow makes the game more tasteful and elevated than if it used other kinds of music. But this has a lot of heart, and is a prime example of how this sort of music should be composed and used. I freaking love this soundtrack. It's really blood-pumping and nostalgic, and it's one of those things that kept me going to the end. The voice work, it's a mixed bag, but I wouldn't call it bad. As for how different the characters sound compared to the way they did yesteryear, I just think that's a stupid thing to complain about. Did you guys seriously expect them to round up all the old voice actors for a reunion? There's only so much they can do. They could try finding people who sound just like the old voice actors, or who can do shitty impressions of them. Take the 3DS port of Starfox 64, for example. They use the same inflections and everything, but I think most of the voice acting in that game is shit. I actually like that they've tried to give a fresh new take on these old characters. I like Pigma's new voice. I like Peppy's new voice. I like Fox's new voice. I like Falco's new voice. I like Pepper's new voice. I like Wolf's new voice. Sure, some of these characters are incredibly annoying and have been totally bastardized, such as Leon, though not nearly as much as he would be in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Some of these characters have had something new contributed to them, and I think it adds a lot to certain characters who, yes, I did find more annoying in Star Fox 64. The only thing I could criticize about the voice acting is that sometimes, mostly near the beginning of the game, a lot of these guys sound kind of bored. They're trying to avoid being campy and pull this off seriously and with tact, because this is a very serious story. But while they mostly pull it off, there's still a lot of NOLA drama. One of the great things about Star Fox 64 was being accompanied by these lovable characters and hearing what they had to say. That's what makes Star Fox so much more immersive and involving than a lot of on-rail shooters where you're just cruising around by yourself. As I said though, it's mostly during the first few missions, and as the game goes on, you get a feeling of the voice actor's passion growing as the story becomes more intense and interesting. Overall, I think it's a fine dub. Let's take a moment to talk about the designs and the art style. In my opinion, this game has some of the best artistic direction of any Nintendo or Namco game ever! I freaking love how everything in this game looks. The outfits, the enemies, the settings, the spaceships. Oh my god, it's all so awesome. I'm not hamming it up here. I really do love this game's art style. The absurd proportions of the Arwings, Landmaster, Great Fox, and any number of other things are offset by how detailed and streamlined they still are. They're really out there, but they're slick and smexy as can be. The graphics of this game aren't that great, but just that they managed to bring most of these crazy, crazy designs to life as well as they did is an accomplishment in and of itself. Everything is just so over the top. It's a feast for the eyes of anyone who may enjoy it. Some people hate this art style because the ships aren't aerodynamic and they would never fly very well in real life, blah 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 blah. I got news, pal. Aerodynamics are irrelevant here. In space, all you need is thrust! Now let's talk about the story. Yeah, it's a pretty simple story that rips off creatures like the Borg and the Reach, but they pull it off with such tact and such great pacing that I find it enjoyable in the end. For one thing, while there are only 10 levels, the layout of these stages and the distribution of story content between each stage is really well put together. The tone intensifies as you progress in a way that makes the gameplay and the story reflect each other. As the gameplay gets crazier, so does the story. It really does give you such a strong feeling that you're really advancing through something big. The game only lasts a few hours, but because of how it's laid out, the whole thing plays out like a really well-directed movie, because the pacing and build-up are just that well done. Let's take Sonic Adventure 2 for instance. Separate, the hero and dark stories feel kinda jumbled and sporadic, even distorted at times. But watch Clement's LP of it to see just how great the story really is. He plays through all the stages on both sides in chronological order, and the whole thing plays out like a really cool movie. Star Fox Assault is yet another one of these very few games like that, games that have such a great cinematic feel, without feeling that the whole thing is just a gigantic interactive cutscene. I am aware that Clement doesn't care for Star Fox Assault, but whatever. The writing is very good, in-game and out. I really love how they treated a lot of these characters through the in-game dialogue, especially near the end of the game. Panther's character really shines on the on-wing sections in Corneria, and he's quite likable. All these characters have moments like this, and it's great. Sometimes, you just have to stick around and listen to them. Again, the story's kinda dumb, but just that they can pull it off with such ambition and finesse just makes me love it. All things considered, Star Fox Assault is a damn good game. People have to accept that this isn't Star Fox 64 and it doesn't need to try to be. The music, story, and visuals are all great, and the gameplay itself, while unusual, is generally solid and a lot more enjoyable than many would have you believe. It does have problems, big ones that may annoy the shit out of you, but its redeeming qualities are so great that they more than make up for it. It's just an underappreciated adventure that's well worth experiencing. I give it an 8 out of 10. Not perfect, but good. I, along with many others, hope that we may finally see another Star Fox game someday, that Nintendo may muster the enthusiasm to try again. But Star Fox 3DS doesn't seem to have sold spectacularly well, so what are you gonna do? I think it's pretty obvious. Do a barrel roll!